All right. Y'all, thank you for coming out. As you know, hurricane season began a little early this year, and we had a storm that came ashore just a few days ago. It did not reach hurricane status, but we've had, I think it's four hurricanes in the last 4 years that we had to deal with. So this is a briefing about that, and we'd be glad to answer everyone's questions and other questions at the end if you have any. I'd like to call on First Director Ken Stinson of the Emergency Management Division. Ken?
Sir. Thank you, sir. Kim Stinson with the State EMD. Just as we get ready every year for the upcoming hurricane season, we need residents at home to do the same. We need everyone to be their own emergency manager. We would like to emphasize that the entire state is susceptible to the effects of a hurricane, not just coastal counties. What we've seen in the past few years is a significant amount of flooding, resulting not just from near misses from hurricanes, but also from other major storm systems that have come near or into South Carolina. Anywhere in South Carolina is prone to flooding, and certainly flash flooding. If you live in a flood-prone area, make sure you have flood insurance. If there's a flood warning issued, make sure you have someplace to go so you don't get trapped by floodwaters. And then never, and I cannot stress this enough, never try to drive through flooded areas or move barricades. Avoid flooded areas at all costs. As you've heard in the past, we encourage citizens to have a plan and make it personal. Due to COVID-19 for hurricane season 2020, we want everyone to remember time, space, people, and place. Time, space, people, and place as a way for people to remember health safety precautions while getting ready for any hurricane that may head towards South Carolina. So for time, give yourself enough time to prepare for a hurricane. Space, make social distancing a part of your every aspect of your hurricane planning. People, make sure all the people in your family know your hurricane plan and make sure that they too know what to do to stay healthy. And then place, know where you will go once the evacuation order is issued for the area. Staying in a hotel or friends or family out of town are excellent options to protect yourself during and after the storm. The 2020 annual South Carolina Hurricane Guide contains updated information about what you can do right now to make sure that you're prepared for the effects of a hurricane. And the 2020 Hurricane Guide is available on our website at scemd.org, along with accessibility through our South Carolina Emergency Manager app, which can be downloaded on your smartphone. And on June 7th, it'll be available in printed format in all newspapers from the coast back to Columbia, also all Walgreens, all interstate welcome centers, and also coastal DMV offices. The last item is, in closing, one of our biggest strengths here in South Carolina is the outstanding local and state team that has planned together, exercised together, and operated together in the last several years. And accordingly, the 9 major disasters that we have experienced in the last 7 years places us in an excellent operational posture for any hurricane that may impact South Carolina this year. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir. General McCarty, Adjutant General.
Thank you, Governor. The South Carolina National Guard, both the Army and Air, in events that we support like hurricane deployments, we are an agency that supports our state entities such as Department of Transportation, other entities here at the state level. We also support our local governments at the county level and the municipal governments, and we work with our federal partners to ensure that we have an adequate response here in South Carolina. In preparation for that, we look and focus on 3 things. First of all, building and maintaining relationships with those that we support. We do that on a constant basis throughout the year, working with our state agencies, working with local government, and with our federal agencies to ensure that we're ready for any type of mobilization that may be necessary. We always have liaison officers that we deploy out to the counties to ensure that we have good channels of communication from the counties back to the state, that we can be sure that we're not ever late to need for what the county may need to support their operations. We also look to always review our plans. We constantly review our plans to ensure they're in sync with the state hurricane plan, and we do that on a regular basis. We rehearse those plans, we exercise those plans, and after we've done that, we do after-action reports to ensure that the plan meets the needs of our supporting entities. Last thing, though, we focus on the mobilization part. The majority of the South Carolina Guard are what we call traditional M-Day soldiers. They're the citizen soldiers. They're at home at times in preparation for these events. So we practice our mobilizations by conducting our alert rosters and recalls, and as we've seen over the last few years, we've actually had to implement that, and we've mobilized, in some cases, over 4,000 soldiers. To support a full-scale mobilization here in South Carolina, it would mean the activation of approximately 1,800 soldiers and airmen. We each year assess those needs against any type of deployments that we have. We have done that this year to ensure that the units that need to be on the ground to support the mission are here, and that the adequate equipment is also available. If we see that we have any shortages, we coordinate with our neighboring states through EMAC agreements where we can bring in resources from other states as needed. And if the situation requires, we're able to utilize the Title 10 or active duty forces, and we do that through the dual status command. We have set up dual status commanders in the past to help command and control active duty forces if they come here into the state. Right now, we are well poised to support what we feel would be any mission requirements that the state may have this year through those means I've just described. Thank you.
Thank you, General. Director Rob Woods, Department of Public Safety.
Thank you, Governor. Good afternoon. The Department of Public Safety, working with its key partner, the Department of Transportation, leads all evacuation operations statewide. For hurricane evacuations, we begin our planning in January. We review all of our routes, ensure that proper signage is in place, the blue evacuation signs, as well as checking all of our traffic control points. Following that, we meet regionally with all of our state and local law enforcement partners, as well as the National Guard and local Department of Transportation, to ensure that all the commitments for resources and personnel are in place in the event that we have to execute an evacuation. The last piece of the planning process is our exercise. This year, our full-scale exercise will be on June 25th, in which we'll test all of our reversal plans for each of our regions, and that will complete our planning process for this year's hurricane season. Just as a point of emphasis as we move into the season, as Director Stinson has mentioned, we want to ensure that every citizen is prepared to evacuate if they're called to evacuate. And from our perspective, there's really two key pieces of advice in that regard. First of all is to ensure that you know your route. It's really critical that folks know their routes and follow their routes so we can distribute all that evacuation traffic evenly and keep the traffic moving as efficiently as we can. The second piece to that is this. Folks are become very, very dependent on their GPS, and we understand that. But in the case of an evacuation, a hurricane evacuation, we ask that you follow those blue signs as opposed to the GPS. That ensures that you stay on your proper route so that we don't put you in a situation in which you try to get to another route and we can't effectively integrate you into that traffic. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Deputy Secretary Leland Colvin, Department of Transportation.
Thank you, Governor.
Welcome.
Good afternoon. SCDT stands ready for hurricane season. We've got our pre-position contracts in place, have completed that, and we work very closely with Director Woods and DPS on the evacuation component. And at this time, I want to show some enhancements to the I-26 lane reversal that we've completed over the off-season. We'll put that on the screen. So this off-season, we looked at the I-26 lane reversal plan. It was developed back in 1999, so it's a plan that's been on the shelf 20 years. And the first 17 years, SCDT never had to implement the lane reversal plan, but we have implemented it 3 out of the last 4 years in conjunction with the governor's evacuation orders. So we looked back and took some of the lessons learned over the last 3 years, and we realized it was time for a tune-up on the I-26 lane reversal itself. So we looked back and took advantage of the numerous improvements we've made over I-26 over the last 20 years. And part of the plan is this first thing we did, we shortened the length of the reversal by 15 miles. So instead of starting a reversal at I-526 in the Charleston end, we moved that up to just the north side of Somerville, next to the new Nexton Parkway. And by shortening the evacuation route for the first 15 miles, we're able to provide greater flexibility in the metro Charleston area, especially getting back and forth to hospitals and then also the airport as you evacuate. Also, we made an enhancement on the very western end as you go into I-77. If you recall, over the last 3 times we instituted the lane reversals, we had a lot of congestion there at the western end as you get on the I-77. So we made some improvements there to allow the normal westbound lanes to continue on to I-26. And then also we'll bring in the crossover lanes as well. So if you look at the bottom right of the map here that we see, you'll see the exit 197 is the new Nexton Parkway. We're going to build a crossover there, so we're going to cross over the left lane going westbound. They will go into the new reverse lanes, and you continue in those reverse lanes. And we've also added 2 additional entry and exit points. The first one is exit 159, which is Homestead Road. That's between Bowman and the south end of Orangeburg. There's a gas station there, so folks can get off, refuel, get refreshments, use the bathroom. And then we have a second entry point or exit point at exit 139, which is Burke Road. That's on the northern side of Orangeburg, near the St. Matthews area. And we'll also have signing in place so that you are in the right lane, that if you, the right side, whether you're on the reverse side of the normal westbound lanes, whether you take an I-77 north once you get to the Columbia end, or you want to continue on I-26. So we've got this in place, and matter of fact, we started building the crossover during the Nexton Parkway this past week, and we've got a couple of photos to show the progress of the construction there. This is looking back west. Again, this is just west of the Nexton Parkway, and this is the crossover that we'll utilize to cross folks over from the normal westbound lanes into the reverse lanes. I think we've got one more photo as well, and this is looking back east. That's the Nexton Parkway interchange, the new interchange in the background there. And we'll have this crossover in place and ready to be used by the end of the week. Thank you, Governor.
Thank you very much. Director Leach, Michael Leach, Department of Social Service.
Good afternoon. DSS's responsibility in hurricane planning is twofold: safeguard the children and vulnerable adults in our care, and as the ESF6 mass care, provide shelter and support for our population during disasters. DSS has the responsibility to provide personnel for assisting and manning the shelters. Sheltering and feeding for hurricane season this year will look different than years past and presents unique challenges. COVID-19, high-risk individuals, asymptomatic carriers, potential early season hurricane with the majority of our staff still working remotely, and increased caseloads. For just sheltering the population, we know we have to allocate almost 3 times the space per individual. So going from 40 square feet to 100 square feet per person, which includes cots, in order to maintain social distance and mitigate virus spread. So we're looking at about 1/3 of the capacity within each shelter. We've implemented changes, screening questionnaire and temporal check by the Red Cross staff to match CDC, DHEC, and Red Cross guidance on health screening to help mitigate risk of exposure in a shelter for both staff and clients. For PPE, Red Cross will have some PPE on hand, and EMD plans to pre-order PPE in case needed for congregate shelters, and DSS will help facilitate getting those PPE to the pre-planned shelter locations. Feeding operations and shelters can no longer be congregate feeding in cafeterias like before, and now we'll be boxing up individual meals for safety. So feeding entities will assist with this, including the Red Cross. We are also identifying areas in every shelter where to conduct screenings with our partners, as well as maintaining social distancing and provide options for those high risk, possibly exposed or positive for COVID-19. If COVID positive or elevated body temperatures, we'll be isolating away from the general population in a pre-designated area until they can be transferred to a non-congregate care setting through a DHEC triage line. It is critical for the public to be aware of the items to bring as you head to a shelter. Things like prescription medications, extra clothing, pillows, blankets, hygiene supplies, anything needed for children, diapers, formulas, toys, important documents. And if a client shows up with a pet, We will assist the client in finding a temporary safe place for the pet, either in a separate area in the shelter or a pet shelter. We'll be working with local DHEC offices to ensure that those already isolating for symptoms of or have tested positive for COVID have a place to go separate from the general population.
Thank you. Marshall Taylor, General Counsel of the Department of Health and Environmental Control.
Thank you, Governor. As Director Leach said, this is going to be a challenging year for us due to the COVID-19 pandemic, but we think we're up to the challenge with our partners. We're joining EMD this season and encouraging South Carolinians to include COVID-19 safety precautions in their hurricane preparedness planning. As part of this effort, we're asking everyone to include cloth masks, soap, hand sanitizer, disinfectants, and other over-the-counter medicines for treating mild symptoms in your emergency supply kits. In addition to encouraging everyone to take individual steps to protect the health and safety of themselves and those around them, DHEC has taken innovative measures to continue to respond to COVID-19 while also preparing to support the state for the potential impact of a storm. This includes planning for challenges to potentially having to operate medical needs shelters during COVID-19, where we won't be able to have congregate settings as previously before. So we're working with our partners to identify unique ways to provide the services needed, looking at utilizing hotel rooms, identifying alternate care site locations, setting up COVID-19 only locations to try to limit the spread, lowering the census where we are forced to have congregate care in each location, and generally providing infection control and monitoring guidance. By taking the time to prepare now, we will all be able to better deal with emergency when it happens. So in addition to having a plan of action in place, please remember to give yourself time to prepare for the hurricane. Please be prepared. Give yourself a safe space. Think about social distancing as part of every aspect of your plan. And make sure that all the people in your family know what to do to stay healthy. You know where to go in case of evacuation. Know your route. Have a plan. While we've never conducted a hurricane operation during a pandemic, we feel certain that together with our partners, we will be able to meet the challenge to protect the residents of South Carolina. Together, we are South Carolina strong. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, as you've heard, this is a very challenging year. This, according to the weatherman, it will be a heavy hurricane year. We've already seen a record number of tornadoes and a record number of strong tornadoes in South Carolina. We've already been wrestling with the pandemic, coronavirus, since wrestling hard since March. Now we're entering hurricane season, and it's forecast that this will be above average in the number and strength of hurricanes. And then recently, as a result of the events in Minnesota and prior events with the tragic, unforgivable death of George Floyd, we are experiencing protests, which we welcome, but also experiencing violence, which we do not. Our National Guard is always ranked at the top in the United States for readiness, and they've demonstrated that yet again, General McCarty, with troops in Afghanistan, and also, I think, about 500 involved in the COVID response, and now hundreds on standby in South Carolina to assist as necessary with law enforcement measures. And then again, just 2 days ago, asked by the Pentagon to go to Washington, and we are there at the strength that they asked in probably record time. So this is a challenging time for us, but we must be ready for these hurricanes, because if we've seen them before, we are highly experienced in our coordination, collaboration, and communication amongst all of the various capacities in the state. But there's a lot of challenges coming at one time. And as for hurricanes, we know there are a lot of moving parts and things that must be done to keep our people safe. And one has been mentioned is don't count on social media and your GPS, but official sources for your information. And those blue signs, we've had people in the past that thought they knew a shortcut, and they would take the shortcut and get to a spot where the road had been blocked or was washed out. And there they were, and they couldn't get back to where they started. And they ended up in deep trouble. We've also seen people drive through what they thought was shallow water with a little bit of movement, and turned out the road was gone with tragic consequences there. So we urge everyone to get one of these booklets. They're all over South Carolina. They're excellent. A lot of thought planning went into them, as well as the advice for the citizens. But here we are in hurricane season in the middle of a pandemic, and the measures and steps that must be taken with moving people and keeping people safe because of the pandemic, which is still a highly dangerous, infectious disease, the likes of which we have not seen before. We still don't know all of its characteristics and ramifications, but we must institute and continue certain measures to address that. And that will necessarily slow down some of our movements if a hurricane comes. In evacuation, getting people out of harm's way, moving people from hospitals or nursing homes to other places, must find places for them to go that will have room for people who have or may have the virus. So this is really, this is a challenge already, and with the possibility of hurricane, that will amplify it many, many times. So as we've been urging people, be prepared, listen to the sources of advice, the official sources that are prepared for hurricanes as well as the pandemic. Use your common sense. Don't be careless. Don't be stupid. And we'll get through it. But we are certainly facing some challenges that we've not had before in our memory, those of us here. But with that, we'd be glad to answer your questions. Ms. Adcox?
Well, what will the shelters look like, and have folks that are commonly used as shelters, have they declined to be used this year? Like
Who
schools?
wants to answer that?
Say that again.
Places that you normally use for shelters, like schools, are they still going to be a shelter, or are folks declining to serve as a shelter this year?
At this point, schools are our primary congregate care shelter. And with a third of the potential population in a school than there normally would be, we are, with the local EMD partners, looking at additional schools.
How many shelters do you have available in general, and how many do you think we'll need?
I think right now that a good number, just based on maybe worst case scenarios, we'd be between maybe 70 to 100 shelters. And I believe the total amount of shelters is in the current hurricane plan that is on the website.
Did the last storm that sort of popped up out of nowhere, did that show us any holes in our planning?
I think we always learn, because every hurricane's different. I know that I think it was the last one, if it'd come in 10 miles closer, we'd have had about 6 more feet of water than we experienced. We never know where they're going to end up, but that's why we try to give as much information out as we can. We know this, we haven't had a hurricane and a pandemic at the same time. So that adds an extra level of complication. Would you like to comment, Mr. Stinson?
Yes, sir. No, absolutely. And in this particular case, we've had that happen before here in South Carolina, where there was a pop-up storm right off the coast. And it certainly, decreases your response time. But in this particular case, because it was just a tropical storm, and normally we don't evacuate for a tropical storm, then, obviously we were in pretty good shape, and there was very little damages or even power outages for that particular one.
that answer your question?
And Governor, talk about, you know, you have to make the evacuation orders. How will the pandemic play into perhaps how far ahead you might do that?
Well, that's a great question. This is, that's the cross currents presented by this situation. Because the requirements of keeping people safe because of the pandemic will slow down the movement of those people and equipment, we will have to make decisions a little earlier, we believe, than we normally would, because we're going to have to allow for the time for that movement to take place. So that complicates the situation. But I can assure you that every year we learn more and more, and some of the systems are getting better, and communications are getting better, as strong as they have been. We learn every time, so we'll get through it as well as anybody in the country, I'm sure. But it'll be a challenge.
What changes are being made as far as helping people get to shelters if they can't evacuate? If you got to put everybody in the same bus, or social distancing measures when you're trying to transport evacuees, what changes do we see
Those
there?
are good questions.
Yeah, that's one of the things that we always have to address, is those people that do not have transportation themselves. So right now, and we've had a plan, and we've actually executed it, I think 3 times now, where we've brought in either school buses or motor coaches. And in a particular case right now in motor coaches is that, to the governor's point, is we're going to have to make that recommendation to him sooner to get those here in South Carolina, probably well before the storm itself. So we're going to have to make those earlier decisions. And then in terms of once the buses get here at the collection points, then we'll have to have screening there, and then the potential for some of those people to be moved to a non-congregate setting because of, you know, possible infection or their family. And then we'll also have to provide face masks for individuals on the bus. And then we're also going to space out the number of passengers on the bus to spread out to give that social distancing. So we've taken that into consideration, but it's going to take a little longer, and it may be a little slower in some cases, but we think that we've got a pretty good plan in terms of making sure that we keep everybody safe and get everybody out of harm's way in terms of the actual potential for surge.
You guys have brought up face masks a couple of times here in the press conference. Here in South Carolina and across the country, we've had people who just flat out do not want to wear a face mask. In terms of a hurricane's coming through and they need to have a mask in a shelter, how are you guys going to handle that, or to get on this bus to be transported?
Well, I think where we're going with this is that, you know, certainly in the Red Cross shelters, that may be a requirement for people to wear a mask. Same for in the buses as well, a requirement to maintain everybody's safety.
More
Governor-
questions? Yes, sir.
Governor, yesterday,
Joe?
DEC officials, they were expressing concern over the rise in cases of COVID-19. Do you agree? And they also said that there are people who were not practicing social distancing or wearing masks. Do you agree that South Carolinians are not heeding these warnings? And is there a point where you may have to put restrictions back in place?
Well, if everyone would follow the practices, we'd be in a better shape than we are now. I think we've all been making the point over and over again that the virus is still here. It's still just as dangerous as it was before. This is a new virus. We don't know exactly what the weather may do to it. We don't know. We're learning that it is more than just respiratory. It goes to other organs. It's not like any virus that we know of. So people have to be careful. And I've seen reports and seen instances on television where people clearly are not following the practices that have been recommended repeatedly. I'm not sure how to get through to some people other than to point out that it's still here. It's all over the country. It's not going to evaporate one day, and it is still highly dangerous, and it is deadly. So we urge all South Carolinians to be smart, be careful, protect yourself, protect your family. There's recklessness that comes up in some circumstances, and we just can't do that. We must be careful. And if everyone would do that, if everyone would use their common sense, we've had great compliance in a number of weeks, terrific compliance. I think the compliance may be dropping off some now, and that is highly unfortunate, and it is also highly dangerous. We must continue until we get control of this. We're chasing the virus now. We know its character. We know some of its characteristics. We do not have a vaccine. We hope to have one, but we're not going to have one in the next couple of months. That's for sure. It may be longer than that. So I just say, people, you got to be careful. It's up to you. It's up to every individual to be careful. Not for their own sake, but for those of their loved ones and neighbors and total strangers that they may come in contact with.
Is there a point where you would actually put restrictions back in place that you've relaxed already?
The main restriction there is to emphasize to people that they must be careful. Well, you cannot lock down an economy forever. Just can't do it, because it would disintegrate, and then it'd be hard to revive. So there is some point at which all over the country things are going to have to open up. But if people would use their head, if they would follow the advice that's been given to them repeatedly, we would not be having the instances, the hot spots, or the rise that we see here and there. Now, those numbers go up and down, as you'll see if you look back over the numbers. But we want to see them going down. We know that as we test more and more, which we are doing, we've been testing the nursing homes over, there are 40,000 people in our nursing homes. I think there are 140 or so, maybe more, nursing home facilities in South Carolina. It might be more than that, but we test them in a very short period of time. And we have close to 200 testing sites in the state. I think it's over 200 now. Many of them are mobile sites, and you go on the website of DHEC or Accelerate SC, and you can find out where they're going to be, when they're going to be, and it's free. And people in some places, they're lining up to get tested. They're being very careful. In others, other places, we've seen people not being very careful. Well, we got to be careful.
As people are clearly not being careful, how is that affecting your decisions on opening the rest of the things that remain closed?
We're being very careful and deliberate about that. We're receiving numbers. We've received recommendations, I think, on almost all of those from Accelerate SC. They're well thought out, and we'll be making announcements. But as you know from before, we've been taking this in a deliberate, steady fashion, both as we restricted activity and now as we are lifting those restrictions. We're being very careful and paying a lot of attention to the numbers. But public health is economic health, mental health, and physical health. You have to have all of them. Yes, you got more?
Well, I was actually going to ask, the protests are going to continue this weekend, and they actually plan to be at the governor's mansion. Will you address them, or what do you want to say to them?
I would say to protesters that we learn from you. We welcome protests. We welcome information. We learn from protesters. Peaceful protests are a part of what makes us smarter and makes us a great country. But violence is something entirely different. There's no excuse for the killing of George Floyd. No excuse. There's no excuse for rioters infiltrating, getting involved in these protests, with peaceful protests, and ended up throwing bricks or chairs through a window and then throwing firecrackers and things on tables where people and families are eating dinner. There's no excuse for that. There's no excuse for slashing tires and burning automobiles. No excuse for that. None. And I can assure you that just as we welcome protesters to our lovely state, and we welcome that. There's nothing wrong with that. But we do not welcome violence. That is criminal activity. There are laws against it, and they will be enforced in South Carolina. Yes, sir.
You said on a call with the president that you thought some of the looters, rioters were being paid. Is there any more information you could share about that?
There's a lot of information about that, as well as other descriptions and insights into the character and who those rioters were. Now, those were not protesters. Protesting is one thing. Rioting and destroying property through criminal acts is something completely different. And I know the Federal Bureau of Investigation, the State Law Enforcement Division, chiefs of the police departments, sheriffs, all of those are gathering information as they go upon making arrests. And we will deal with those who are breaking the law, that are violent and causing damage to persons and property in South Carolina.
Has the National Guard been, I know they've been on standby, has they been involved in any of the rioting or quelling
The
rioting?
National Guard has not rioted.
No, sorry.
I know what you mean. Yes, they have been involved, and they had the proper effect. Would you like to address that, Jim?
Yes, we have had some of our National Guardsmen in response. We haven't had any here in Columbia yet, but we had a number sent to Charleston. They were assigned to the Charleston Police Department and patrolled with them. I think probably all told, we've had about 50 that were assigned to mission, and we are just on standby, though, to support any additional missions that may come up.
Have they gone up to D.C. yet?
Yes, they have. We got notification on Tuesday, and by Wednesday we were working with the Air Force for airlift, and they were sent up to D.C. by Wednesday evening. They were on the ground there, and late Wednesday night we had approximately 200 soldiers on duty, and we are scheduled to have an additional force similar to that tonight on duty, and their mission is primarily just presence patrol at some of our national monuments in working in support of the District of Columbia National Guard.
How long will they be in D.C.?
I don't know that we can really say that for sure. We are, the time period is spelled out in the orders through the weekend, but I think certainly an event like this, it's all situational dependent about what that status will be long term.
How does that affect, if we have a hurricane, how does that affect that?
Right now, we're still in good shape. The South Carolina National Guard, between the Army and the Air, is well over a 10,000 person force between the two. Between what we have as early identified in support of the COVID mission, we have about 500 there. We have about 500 that are deployed here in South Carolina in support of the civil unrest mission. We have about 450 that are deployed to the National Capital Region. We have not quite 1,000 that are currently deployed overseas in support of named operations or named exercises. So we still have a significant capacity here in the state to draw upon to meet the requirements as stated in the hurricane plan that I mentioned earlier. I don't see at this time that we would have any issues except in areas that we traditionally have issues. We normally have to look to, and depending upon the storm's impact to the state, to bring in through EMAC, and that's the Emergency Management Assistant Compact. We have to bring in, and have done so, engineers from other states. North Carolina came in 2015. Occasionally we have to bring in MPs, and we always look to have at least aircraft available to support search and rescue, operations there. But outside of that, the general purpose troops, we're normally in very good shape to support all the needs that we have here in the state.
That answer your question? Yeah. Are there more questions?
Yes, Governor.
Let's go to this man over here first.
So yesterday, the South Carolina Legislative Black Caucus held a press conference, and they had mentioned just some things they would like to see done in response to these protests and the death of George Floyd. Some of those things include a council or a commission that would look at police reform efforts in South Carolina, passing a hate crimes bill here in the state, and then the other thing as well is fully funding police body camera laws. Have you had conversations with them about these, or looking at potential reform efforts in response to these protests?
Yes, I think I've spoken to a number of the leaders there, and we had a conversation here on Sunday, as you remember, when we had a lot of the leaders of the African American community here with us. And those talks and ideas are ongoing, and you will see some activity as well as a lot of recommendations that will come out of these conversations. And there may be a formal group, large or small, or several others, but this is a good time to take a good look at what we can do better in a variety of situations. Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. So as we've said this whole time, coronavirus is still with us, and we're still talking about what we can do to reopen the economy. Do you think that businesses should be mandated to follow those CDC guidelines to make sure that they're still reopening safely and that people can have that kind of confidence to go back and that we can keep the numbers down? And if not, why?
No, what the main thing we can do is make it very clear as to what people need to do. There is some point at which mandates simply do not work because they are unenforceable largely. But to emphasize to people the facts, that is to inform, knowledge is power. When people understand the consequences of the behavior perhaps that they are involved in or that they see, when they stop and realize the consequences of that is when you get good results, and that is what we're counting on the people of South Carolina to do, as we have from the very beginning. And it has worked so far. We've seen we know that we're going to get more positive tests because we're giving many more tests statewide than we were doing before. So naturally, if you double the amount of tests, you may double the amount of positives. The numbers will go up and down, but in the end, the only way to keep the people safe is to have the people themselves take it upon themselves to follow the best practices, follow the rules, understand they're dealing with a very dangerous virus that is still here just as it was back in March, and just as we saw it explode in New York and other places. That same virus is still here. It's not left. It's not going to leave. And we got to be careful. Particularly, the weather's warming up. People want to get outside. A lot have stayed inside. They're ready to get outside, and we're all for that. But you've got to be careful. Got to be careful, inside or outside. You got to be. All y'all were tested for, or given the thermometer thing before you came in here, I believe. Well, that's because we're being careful here. I think you're pretty safe right here. Well, in some places it's not like that, but people need to be careful. Any more questions? Yes, sir.
Governor, Journal Mattis yesterday, I think in an op-ed, said that he thought the president was being intentionally divisive. I was wondering what you thought about his comments, and do you agree with them?
Well, that's General Mattis's comment. I think the president is very able to explain himself. We're in a difficult situation, and with this virus, and in South Carolina, we have hurricanes on top of that. So we have plenty to concentrate on here. Yes, sir.
If I could, Governor, if we could talk a little bit more about President Trump. On the call with him, you basically agreed with what he was saying, that strength works and you have to dominate, and you spoke about having Humvees roll through the streets of Charleston.
That's right.
Would you say, because I know one of the criticisms that's out there of that kind of mindset is that it in of itself is an escalation, and even when you have Humvees rolling through or having such a big presence, do you think that would deter the peaceful protesters that you want to hear from?
No, I view we've made it very clear in South Carolina. Listen up. We made it very clear we welcome protests. We've had a lot of protests over the years in South Carolina and had no trouble with them at all. But when rioters get involved in a peaceful protest and resort to violence and are destroying people's property, that is not a good thing. It is against the law, and we will do all we can to see that it doesn't happen. So in having the force necessary to stop that is a way to prevent that from happening. And that's where the National Guard comes in. That's where strong police presence is a good thing to have. You hope you don't need it, but if you need it, then it's good to have it there. But usually, if you have a very strong protest, you don't have violence, and that's what we're trying to do. We want to be sure things are peaceful for the protesters, for what they're doing, the people that want to join with them, that want to be there. Things are peaceful for those who have businesses, who have families, who's living in their homes. But we want to be sure to maintain law and order and peacefulness and safety for those people. And Ronald Reagan used to talk about peace through strength. Well, this is an iteration of peace through strength. I see it as a de-escalation of violence. That is the whole purpose.
Well, still, when you bring that up, though, personally, I just honestly don't know many people who, if they see military Humvees or military-style Humvees rolling through the streets, that they want to be there no matter what they're there to talk about. I understand how you say that it could stop rioters, but the peaceful protesters were also some folks who were still out there, and then they saw this rolling through. What kind of mindset would
when there's a curfew in effect, it's time to go home. And if there's a strong presence at that time, then that's another indication it's time to go home and be peaceful and go home.
Last question,
What do you think of President Trump clearing Lafayette Square in order to take a picture in front of St. John's Church?
I don't know the details on that. I've only heard what some folks have said. I know it's a very difficult situation up there in D.C. right now, and that's demonstrated by the fact that we've sent guardsmen up there. It's a tough situation.
Thank you.
Thank you.